Hi, I'm Angela, a watercolor artist, and I love painting florals. Today, we have the third episode of our Valentine's Day series, and this is what we are going to paint today. If you haven't watched the earlier two series where we have painted different other compositions of roses, I'll leave the links in here so that you can go and watch them as well after maybe you finish this video. So here is the painting that we are going to paint today. This is again small roses scattered here and there, and main attractive point is the lettering in here in gold. I don't know if you can see the shimmer in here, but then it looks really nice when you're looking directly at it. It's got that gold shimmer and shine going on. If you haven't watched the earlier videos, I would highly recommend you go and watch them as well so that you get a fair bit idea about how to paint these roses. Although we'll be covering the basics again in this video as well. So let's get into the video then. First off, we will see what supplies we need for this painting. The supplies I'm using today for this painting is Winsor & Newton watercolor cakes. I find this palette to be really helpful because it's got, I think, 18 different shades, and they're all covering all the primary colors, and they also have some secondary colors. It's a really good investment, I feel. For brushes, I'm using a set from the brand Artify. So they sent me over their collection, and all of these brushes are really good in this painting. So I'll be using, I think, the dagger brush or the flat brush, the angular brush and the round brush, and also the fine liner brush from the set today. And finally, the most important part of this is the watercolor paper. So I am using the Arches 300 GSM 100% pure watercolor cold pressed paper. So it got a slight texture. I don't know if you can see it on the camera, but this is the slightly grained texture paper that I'm using. Please be mindful to try and use a good paper for this watercolor. I'm starting off by taking a paper that is 5 times 7 inches of size. So this is half of the size of the paper that comes in the block. So I start off by dividing the page into half. I'm marking a center line and then marking 3 lines horizontally. That is where I'm going to write my letters, I love you. I'm trying to mark the center by measuring with a ruler and then marking everything. I like to use the old way. There might be better, easier way of doing this, but I'm just marking with pencil the letters that I want to do, and I'll go over it with the brush now. I'm using a flat brush for this purpose to write the letters because I want it to be like really bold and a statement sentiment over there. So I'm using a flat brush, and I'm just trying to understand how wide my alphabets are going to be if I use that flat brush. I think this is a size 6 that I'm using. So I just want to be sure that I have enough space on the page before I start. The gold paint I'm using is a really pigmented gold paint, and I kind of forgot to mix it really well. The gold pigments were settled at the bottom, so I had to go in again second time and then write down the alphabet. The trick to any lettering is that when you have a downstroke, that has to be thick and the upstroke has to be thin. So what is a downstroke? Imagine you're writing the alphabets simply by hand. Okay, so you're not going to lift your pen after every stroke that you give. So the L is going to have, from top you start and the stroke goes downwards, and then to the left side, when you go into the right side, that's a straight stroke, isn't it? So wherever your brush is going down, you make it thicker, and wherever the brush goes to any other direction, just make it thin. That's what you're going to do. I'm going to let this dry for a while before I add in the next layer and add more of that gold pigment. You can see when I go in next time, the gold is really shining through. I made sure that I have shaken my gold paint really well enough this time so that I've got all that pigment going on in my lettering this time. I'm also trying to add in all the exact details that I had missed out earlier. This is going to be the last time I'm going to go over the gold. So I'm making sure I have done all the details. Before I start out painting the flowers, I'm making sure I have erased off all of those pencil marks. I don't want them to be showing out of my watercolor painting later on. If you haven't watched the earlier video about the rose painting, I would highly recommend that you guys go and watch that video. I'm going to leave a link at the top here so that you can have a look at it. What I'm doing here is to take a really light, pigmented, very, very washed down watercolor on my flat brush, and I'm trying to make circles. And when I make circles, I also make sure that the end is exactly not circles, but then I've got some curves at the edge, which kind of represents the petals we're going to look for. And when the surface is still wet, I'm going to add in a little bit of more pigment at the center. I have to paint a lot of flowers in this case because I'm planning to fill up the entire paper with roses here, okay? So I know that my paint and my paper is going to dry up within this much seconds because I've practiced similar roses on the same paper. So because of that knowledge that I have, I'm making sure that I go back and paint the centers before it dries off. So that's the reason I paint like 3-4 of the base layers and then go back and then go for the next 3-4 flowers. I also want to break that monotony of the flowers by having different sizes of roses. Some of them are smaller, some of them are larger. And when it's wet, I still went in and put in the second layer. This is again a deeper red pigment. Whenever you put pigments, that is in layers, make sure that you're not hiding off everything from the earlier layer. So make sure the more layer you put in, the thinner your strokes have to be. So your base layer was using the flat side of the brush. So when you move into the topmost layer, you have to make sure you're using the thinnest tip of your brush. Moving to the leaves, I'm taking again a light wash and then adding the leaves. For the sake of symmetry, I'm kind of adding the leaves on kind of opposite directions. So it's going to be diagonal, maybe top to bottom or sideways. I'm trying to just mix and match for every flower, and also some flowers are closer to the lettering. So I wouldn't want the leaves to be overlapping with the lettering. I'm making sure that the leaves are not, aligned in straight lines, top to bottom, but some of them are tilted and all that. This time I would also want all the leaves to not look like. So each of the flowers is going to have maybe a bigger leaf and then one of them is going to be a smaller one. But, it's not going to be the same element there. And before the base layer of the leaf dries off, I'm adding a little bit of that green shade so that it just diffuses on its own, spreads on its own, and it's got that light, nice gradient. It's time for the next layer of the flower because we don't have anything else to do in the leaf until that's dry. So I'm taking up a little bit darker, deeper red. I've added a little bit of red and a little bit of black to the existing mix, and that way I get a bit of a deeper shade. And if you can see what I'm doing, I've got a couple of roses here, so it'll be easier for you to understand. What I have done is I'm adding in the center, that's going to be like a blob of the darker shade. And then on my right side, I'm adding smaller, thinner strokes, whereas on the left side, I've got like a big, deep stroke. This is what I usually do for all my roses. If you've noticed, this is how I bring up the detail. So it's going to be center 2-3 strokes. And then on the left side, I'm going to have like a thicker stroke. And then everything else is going to be thinner strokes around. This is just one of the layer. And then we are going to build this up even more. I think sometimes we just feel like we need to stop. But then this one looks okay. But then if you wait and look at how we end the painting, I'm sure you'd appreciate how much each of these layers actually add to the actual painting at the end. So don't be fearful about adding more layers. Just stop when you think it is necessary, but otherwise keep going. Don't worry about it. Well, so since we are done with the flowers layer, I'm going in and adding the layer for the leaves. And I forgot to mention that this third layer that we are doing is dry technique. So we are doing it on a dry surface and not a wet surface. If you can see, that's the reason the paint is not spreading. It's just there where we are putting the strokes. Some people like to have everything really blended out. But what I have understood is that for a flower, I really like to have a blended background, but then more details is nice when it's in a dry brush stroke. I don't know, it's just my style. Maybe something you might like or you might not like, but I think eventually the purpose of all these practice is to try what others are doing, but choose what really works for you. So maybe this is something that I stuck with, but maybe something that you want to give it a miss and then try something else. So don't worry about it if you don't like it. you can always go back to something that you like. All right, so now that we are done with the leaves, and yeah, sorry, in between all the talking, I forgot to mention about the background leaves that we added, like a really, really very pale shade of green, but that just helps me to have a gradient between the white background and the colors that we have. I just feel like there's quite a lot of gap now and that needs to be filled in. So I'm adding a little bit of branches, really tiny branches with the tip of the brush. And I'm using a very diluted version of a brownish green. So I'm adding a bit of brown with the green so that it just stands out differently, the branches, and doesn't look exactly like a leaf there. Once we're done with the branches, I kind of know that my flower has dried, and that would be the perfect time for me to go back in and add in the layers. So as you can see, I've added in a little bit more of black this time, and it's a bit more a deeper shade. I'm going with the exact same strokes, all right, but every time I go in, I'm going to use a thinner or a smaller brush. So this is a size 4 small round brush and not the flat brush, so that if you can see, I'm not covering the entire of the earlier layer, but trying to put in the details in between these layers so that everything just stands out still. The strokes are exactly the same. It's a center dot, a little more of a wider or a thicker stroke on the left side, followed by a lot of C strokes on left and right, left and right. So just keep practicing this on a rough paper first. Take out your sketchbook, take out whatever paper you have. Don't worry about whether it's watercolor paper or not, and try this roses, just the leaves separately before you dive into this. So you get an idea as to how you need to put in the strokes. I'm alternating between the flower and the leaves because whatever I'm doing right now is all dry strokes. So whenever I'm doing the flowers, I know that the leaves will get some time to dry. And when I'm doing the leaves, I know that the flowers are going to get some time to dry. So the last layer of the leaves is done as well. And I'm going to do that final touch up, trying to remove all of those eraser marks, and we'll go in and give that final touch. I just have a look at the end and I feel like there is something else missing. Maybe another layer at the center of the flower, which I'll add in now. But I don't want to overpower so much of what is already done. So it's going to be a really tiny dot just maybe at the center. The gold also doesn't look very popping, as in it's a bit too mellow. I feel I need that gold to shine through, so I'm going to add in a little bit of shadow with a black pen. And what I have done is to just make sure that I draw the shadow correctly. So I've done that with a pencil first so that I know exactly where the shadow is cast, and then I go back and do it with a pen. With a black color coming from beneath the gold has got some kind of a attention, and it just shines through, and I like how this looks now. And as I said, just one last touch to that flower, and I guess that should be it. It's just my personal preference. I'm sure that you feel it's perfect already. Or maybe if you just have a look now and tell me if that black dot at the center is making any difference or not. It really depends upon your person's perspective, isn't it? This is how we finally completed our card. I hope you really liked this video. If you did, and if you watched so far, please consider subscribing and also leave some comments so that I know what you liked in this video. Until we see you with another video, bye bye.